She grabbed a stranger's hand to avoid her ex-husband, not knowing he was a billionaire CEO. It was a single, desperate act in a crowded room, a choice made in a heartbeat to escape a past she couldn't seem to shake. But what happens when one moment of pretend bravery sets you on a collision course with destiny? Before we uncover the story of Aara and the choice that changed your life forever, I want you to tell me in the comments, have you ever had a single moment that you knew, right then and there, would change everything that came after? Let's share our stories. And if you believe in the power of fate and second chances, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because you won't want to miss where this journey leads. To understand the desperate choice she was about to make, you first have to understand the silence she lived in every day. At 32, Aara Mendez was a ghost, a brilliant architectural ghost haunting the sterile, high-end offices of Stratton and Ross. She was the firm's best-kept secret, the mind behind their most creative concepts, but a name no client had ever heard. Everything she couldn't say out loud, she poured into her sketchbook. And on this particular afternoon, that sketchbook held a breathtaking idea for the firm's biggest new client, the Vance Project. It wasn't just a building. It was a living tower wrapped in a vertical garden, a design with a soul. A soul she knew with sickening certainty would soon be claimed by someone else. With a deep breath, she decided that just this once she would fight for it. That flicker of courage led her down the long, quiet hall to the glass-walled office of her boss, Kalin Ross. Kalin was a woman who wore her success like expensive armor, with a polished smile that never quite reached her eyes. Aara explained her vision with a passion that had long been dormant. She spoke of how the building could solve ventilation problems, create a visual impact, and become a sanctuary in the middle of the city. Her competence was undeniable. Kalin listened, her fingers tapping a slow, rhythmic beat on the polished desk. When Aara finished, Kalin slowly closed the sketchbook. Her voice was smooth, like honey laced with ice. "It's interesting, Aara. A bit poetic, perhaps, but interesting. Leave it with me. I'll see if I can polish this into something viable to present in the partners' meeting. Good work." The word polish hung in the air, a condescending euphemism for steel. The familiar heat of frustration rose in Aara's chest, but she forced a smile and walked away. As she approached her desk, she heard Karen's voice, now animated and triumphant, on the phone with a senior partner. "Karen, voice a distancia. Robert, darling, I've had an epiphany for the Vance Project, something that's going to change everything." And in that moment, Aara felt the familiar weight of invisibility settle over her once more. Her soul, sketched onto paper, had just become the blueprint for someone else's masterpiece. She sank into her chair, the energy drained from her body, wondering how much longer she could stand being the ghost in her own life. Aara's chance to fight for her idea, or to see it stolen completely, would come a week later at one of the industry's most important events, the annual New York Architecture Gala. It was a night where deals were closed with a handshake, and reputations could be made or broken over a glass of champagne. And at the center of it all, like the sun around which all other planets orbited, was Kalin Vance. At 38, Kalin was the billionaire CEO of Vance Holdings and the most sought-after client in the city. But he was not an easy man to impress. The story whispered in the boardrooms was of a ruthless strategist, emotionally closed off, whose eyes could see through any flattery. He wasn't there to make friends. He was there to find the best. And tonight, Stratton and Ross, represented by Kalin, was trying desperately to prove that they were the best. Aara was there, feeling like a misplaced accessory. She watched Kalin sweep through the ballroom, laughing and networking, while she remained on the fringe, invisible. That's when a voice from her past, cold and terribly familiar, spoke from behind her. "I didn't expect to see you here, Aara. I figured events like this were a little out of your league." It was Marcus, her ex-husband, an architect from a rival firm, with a smile Aara knew all too well, a smile that always came before a strike. She forced herself to stand tall, to not let the old wave of insecurity wash over her. "I'm working on the Vance project, Marcus. I'm supposed to be here." "Aara, you always dreamed too big. Some people were born to stay in the background. It's safer there." Those words, they were the same words he had used for years to clip her wings, to keep her small. And to hear them here, in public, in front of colleagues who could overhear, was like a punch to the gut. The humiliation hit her with full force, reopening the wound she fought so hard to heal. She felt her eyes well up with tears and knew she had to get out of there before she fell apart. She turned abruptly, without a word, and walked blindly through the sea of people. That's when her heel caught on the thick carpet and she stumbled, her body pitching forward into an inevitable fall. In an act of pure instinct, she reached out and grabbed the first solid thing she could find to steady herself, and man's arm. She caught her balance, took a shaky breath, and looked up to apologize. And her heart stopped. She wasn't holding the arm of any guest. She was holding the arm of Kalin Vance. And he wasn't looking at her face. His intense, unreadable eyes were fixed on Marcus across the room. Kalin had heard every single word. Time seemed to freeze. Alaara's hand was still on his arm, the warmth of the expensive suit fabric under her trembling fingers. Kalin Vance didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply held Marcus's gaze from across the room with an unnerving stillness. There was no anger in his eyes, nothing so obvious. It was a look of pure, cold dismissal, a silent judgment that said, "You are insignificant." Under that silent pressure, Marcus's smug expression faltered. He gave a slight, awkward nod, turned, and disappeared into the crowd. He had been erased from the conversation without a single word being spoken. Only then did Kalin lower his gaze to Aara. She quickly pulled her hand back as if burned, her face flushing with a deep, painful shame. "Mr. Vance, I am so sorry. I tripped. Please, excuse me." She was ready for the inevitable dismissal, a curt nod, a look of annoyance. She was a clumsy junior architect who had literally fallen into his lap after being humiliated. But Kalin didn't do what she expected. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. His expression wasn't one of pity. It was sharp, assessing, as if he was seeing past the teary-eyed, flustered woman in front of him and looking at something else entirely.
His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and steady. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was precise. "Mendes, your first name is Aara, correct? You're on the early concept team for my project at Stratton and Ross." Aara's breath caught in her throat. It was the last thing she ever expected to hear. He knew her name, not just her last name, but her first. He knew her role on his project, a project with hundreds of people involved. In a moment where she felt her smallest and most invisible, this man, the most important man in the room, had just acknowledged her existence with stunning clarity. He wasn't saving her. He was seeing her. Yes, that's me." "I see." And that was it. He gave her a single, final nod, a gesture that felt less like a dismissal and more like a confirmation. Then he turned and continued on his way, disappearing into the crowd as if nothing had happened. Aara stood frozen in place, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sting of Marcus's words was still there, but now it was mixed with a powerful, confusing new emotion. It was the shock of being seen when you are certain you are invisible, and it was a feeling she would not be able to shake. The next morning, the gala felt like a bizarre dream. Aara walked into the office feeling hungover, not from alcohol, but from the emotional whiplash. The shame of Marcus's words still stung, but it was overshadowed by the baffling memory of Kalin Vance's final look. She expected to be the subject of office gossip, the clumsy junior architect who made a scene. She kept her head down, preparing for the worst. She sat at her desk, the little cactus on her desk the only cheerful thing in sight, and opened her email with a sense of dread. There, at the top of her inbox, was a forwarded message. The original sender was Kalin Vance. The recipients were Robert Stratton and Karen Ross. The subject line was simply, "Vance Project, a question." Her heart began to pound. With a trembling finger, she opened it. The email was short and brutally efficient. In it, Kalin stated that he had been reviewing the firm's past portfolios and was unimpressed with the safe and uninspired direction the current project was heading. Then he pointed to a single, obscure slide from a presentation 2 years ago. It was a conceptual design for a residential building, featuring an innovative bioluminescent lighting system integrated into the facade. A system that learned and adapted to the inhabitants' daily rhythms. Kalin's email ended with a simple, demanding question. This is the level of thinking I was promised. Who was the architect responsible for this concept? Aara felt the air leave her lungs. The bioluminescent lighting system. It was her idea. A passion project she had developed in her own time, which Karen had called impractical, before burying it in a generic company presentation and taking partial credit. And now, Kalin Vance had resurrected it. He had seen past all the polished, soulless designs and had found the one tiny piece of her soul she had managed to sneak into the company's archives. A moment later, an icy chill swept through the office. Karen Ross walked out of her glass office, her face a mask of controlled fury. She didn't look at anyone, but her eyes were locked on Aara's workstation. The email hadn't just created a ripple. It had created a crisis. Kalin Vance was demanding a specific architect, and for the first time, Karen couldn't claim the idea as her own.
A sharp ping came from Aara's computer, a new message from Karen. It contained only 3 words, Karen, voice, as if a text message. My office, now. As Aara stood up, her legs shaking, she knew this was it. She was no longer a ghost. A billionaire she had met for only a few seconds had just, intentionally or not, put a spotlight directly on her. And now she would have to face the consequences. Walking into Karen's office felt like stepping into a lion's den. The air was cold, sterile, and the only thing on Karen's massive oak desk was her laptop and the printout of Kalin's email, sitting there like an accusation. Karen gestured to the chair opposite her without looking up. Aara sat, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. After a silence that stretched for an eternity, Karen finally spoke, her voice a low, dangerous purr. Aara, about Mr. Vance's inquiry, it seems your poetic little side project has caught his attention. He has a sentimental attachment to impractical things, it seems. It was a verbal trap, an attempt to frame Aara's idea as a flight of fancy, a childish notion that a serious client had mistakenly latched onto. The old Aara would have apologized. She would have agreed and shrunk in her seat. But the woman who sat there now was different. She had been seen. She remembered the look in Kalin Vance's eyes. His voice was calm, steady, and professional. The bioluminescent facade is more than poetic, Karen. It's a fully integrated, sustainable system. Based on my research, it can reduce the building's energy consumption by over 30% and cut light pollution to almost zero. It's not impractical, it's the future. Karen's eyes narrowed. This was not the timid, agreeable subordinate she was used to. This was an expert defending her work.
Realizing that intimidation wouldn't work, Kalin shifted her tactics. She smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. This was her checkmate. "Good. I'm glad you're so confident in it, because Mr. Vance was so intrigued by the idea that he is on his way here. He will be in our conference room in 1 hour, and you are going to be the one to present it to him. Alone." There it was, the trap. Kalin wasn't promoting her. She was setting her up to fail. She was throwing Aara into a room with the most demanding CEO in the city, expecting him to tear her poetic idea and her confidence to shreds. If Aara failed, Kalin could go back to the client, apologize for the junior architect's mistake, and present her own, safer plan. She would be the hero who cleaned up the mess. A wave of terror washed over Aara, cold and sharp. Her mind screamed at her to run, to say she wasn't ready. She could almost hear Marcus's voice in her ear, telling her she was born for the background.
But then another thought pushed through the fear. This wasn't just a trap. It was a chance. The one and only chance she might ever get to have her work seen, to have her voice heard. The ghost was being offered a spotlight. "Okay." Karen's smile faltered for just a second, surprised by the lack of hesitation. Aara stood up, her terror now forged into a sharp, focused adrenaline. She had 1 hour to prepare for the meeting that would either be the end of her career or the very beginning of it. The next hour was a blur of focused intensity. Aara didn't panic. She gathered every piece of research, every calculation, every schematic she had ever developed for her bioluminescent facade. This was her soul, sketched onto paper, and she would not let it be dismissed as mere poetry. She walked into the vast, empty conference room, the long mahogany table reflecting the cold gray sky outside. She was alone, just as Kalin had planned. Punctually, the door opened, and Kalin Vance walked in. He was alone as well. He didn't offer a pleasantry or a smile. His presence was formidable, his eyes sharp and skeptical. He sat at the opposite end of the long table, opened his laptop, and gestured toward the screen at the front of the room. "Miss Mendez, my time is limited. I've been shown a dozen designs for this building. All of them safe, all of them forgettable. Your company's portfolio claimed innovation. The concept in my email was the first sign of it I've seen. Explain to me why it's anything more than a drawing." The challenge was clear. Her hands trembled as she plugged in her laptop. The first words caught in her throat. She could feel Karen's trap closing in, the weight of Kalin's skepticism pressing down on her. But then the first image of her design appeared on the large screen, the building glowing softly in the twilight. And Aara forgot to be afraid. She began to speak, her voice gathering strength with every word. She didn't just describe a beautiful idea. She presented a meticulously researched, data-driven solution. "It's a dynamic facade, Mr. Vance. The bioluminescent algae are housed in a closed-loop, self-sustaining irrigation system that not only generates light, but also purifies the building's gray water. The data shows it reduces nighttime energy consumption by over 30% and eliminates light pollution. The patterns of light aren't random. They are designed to shift in response to the building's internal activity, making the tower feel alive. It's not just a feature, it's the building's circulatory system." She spoke for 20 minutes, moving through structural requirements, cost analysis, and sustainability ratings. She answered his sharp technical questions before he even had a chance to fully ask them. She wasn't a junior architect anymore. She was a visionary in her element. And Kalin Vance watched her. The skepticism in his eyes slowly dissolved, replaced by a focused, intense curiosity. He leaned forward, his own laptop forgotten. He wasn't just listening, he was seeing her. Seeing the brilliant mind that had been hidden from him. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest, waiting for the verdict. Kalin looked from the screen back to her, his expression unreadable but changed. He was no longer looking at a subordinate, but at a peer. He closed his laptop and stood up. "One question, Miss Mendez." "Yes?" Why was a concept this revolutionary buried in a 2-year-old marketing portfolio instead of being the centerpiece for the pitch for my project? The question hung in the air, a perfect validation of her talent and a damning indictment of the people who had tried to keep her in the shadows. It wasn't praise, it was something more. It was respect. And for Aara, it felt like the beginning of everything. And just like that, the entire power dynamic of Stratton and Ross was shattered. The news of Kalin's ultimatum spread through the office like a shockwave. Karen, cornered and furious, had no choice but to agree. In a company-wide meeting, she was forced to announce Ilara's promotion, her voice tight with a falsely sweet smile that looked more like a snarl.
The weeks that followed were a whirlwind, but it was a shared storm. Aara and Kalin fell into a rhythm, working late into the night in the quiet, empty office. It was during one of these nights that their partnership was truly forged. They were reviewing the energy flow schematics for the bioluminescent facade. "The cost of the filtration pump for the algae system is a significant line item, Ms. Mendez. My analysts are suggesting a cheaper, standard efficiency model. It would save nearly $1 million up front." Aara didn't flinch. She had anticipated this challenge. She pulled up a different data set, her passion for the project overriding any sense of intimidation. "The standard model saves money up front, Mr. Vance, but it costs us in the long run. It's louder, requires more maintenance, and its energy draw is 20% higher. Over 10 years, it will cost the building double what we save today. But more than that, it's the soul of the project. The custom pump is virtually silent. It allows the facade to breathe organically, not mechanically. People won't just see the light, they will feel the quiet, living pulse of the building. That's not something you can put a price on." There was a long silence. Kalin stared at the data on the screen, then at Aara. He was a man who had built his empire on numbers and logic, and she had just met him on his own turf, armed not only with data, but with a vision he couldn't deny. A slow smile spread across his face. "Keep the custom pump. And Mendez, call me Kalin." In that moment, she was no longer Ms. Mendez, the junior architect. She was Aara, his equal, and that respect was more intoxicating than any romance. This newfound partnership led to an evening where they were bent over a large blueprint spread across the conference table, the only light coming from a single lamp, casting long shadows around them. "If we shift the load-bearing columns here, we can open up the atrium, give it more breathing room." "Show me." They both reached for the same pencil. Their hands brushed against each other, a simple, accidental touch that sent a jolt of electricity through the quiet room. The professional barrier between them seemed to evaporate. They both looked up, their faces suddenly very close in the warm glow of the lamp. The air grew thick with unspoken words. His gaze dropped to her lips, and for a heartbeat, Aara was sure he was going to kiss her. But from the hallway, Karen Ross stood in the shadows, watching them. She had seen the shared glances, the easy laughter during stressful moments, and now this. She finally understood. She wasn't just losing control of her project, she was losing, period. And as she watched the intimate moment between them, her expression hardened into a cold, calculated resolve. If she couldn't dismiss Ilara's talent, she would have to destroy her character. The moment between Aara and Kalin passed, broken by the mundane ringing of a late-night cleaning crew's cell phone, but the charge in the air remained. For Aara, it was a spark of hope. For Karen, it was a declaration of war. She didn't act immediately.
Her attack was far more strategic. She planted a poisonous seed with the office's most notorious gossip, underallowed whether Kalin's interest in Aara was truly professional. That was all it took. Within a week, the whispers followed Aara down every hallway.
And one afternoon, she came face to face with them. She went to the sleek stainless steel coffee bar in the office pantry. Two female colleagues from the marketing department were laughing by the espresso machine. The moment they saw her, the laughter died. They fell silent, exchanged a look, and one of them picked up her cup and walked away without a word. The other just stared at Aara with a look of undisguised disdain. It's amazing how loud silence can be. They don't see the late nights. They don't see the data, the drawings, the dozens of iterations. They see a story that is simpler. A story where my mind doesn't matter and my body is the only currency I have. It's a prison of their own making, but I'm the one they've locked inside. She poured her coffee, her hands trembling slightly, and walked away, the silence of the two women screaming behind her. Karen's attack wasn't just damaging her reputation, it was isolating her. Her promotion was no longer seen as a triumph of talent, but as a sordid transaction. The attack came to a head during the project's most critical progress meeting. The room was filled with senior partners, engineers, and Kalin Vance himself. This was Aara's moment to present the finalized schematics. She was walking them through the digital blueprints when one of Karen's senior allies, a man named David, cut her off. "Wait a minute. Go back. Aara, is that measurement correct on the primary load-bearing support? It looks off by at least a foot." A cold silence fell over the room. Aara's blood ran cold. The number was wrong. A rookie mistake impossible for her to have made. She knew instantly that this was sabotage. Before she could speak, Karen's voice cut through the silence, dripping with false sympathy. "Oh dear. Well, we can't expect perfection. Perhaps Miss Mendez has had other things on her mind lately that have been distracting her from the details." The insinuation was vile, and it landed perfectly. The rumor and the proof of incompetence were now linked in a single public humiliation. Aara stood there, frozen, her credibility about to shatter. This was the end. She could feel it. But then something else pushed through the despair. Anger, a cold, quiet fury at being so expertly dismantled. She lifted her chin. That's not right. That can't be right. I checked those schematics myself last night, a dozen times. That number is not my number." "The screen doesn't lie, Aara." But before she could deliver the final blow, a new voice cut through the tension. "She's correct. The screen doesn't lie, but it also doesn't tell the whole story. Miss Mendez, every action on your firm's server is logged, is it not? Please, pull up the access and version history for this specific file." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Karen's face went pale. With shaking hands, Aara navigated to the file's metadata. And there it was, as clear as day. A modification made from a senior architect's workstation at 6:13 a.m. that morning. The sabotage was no longer an accusation. It was a fact, time-stamped and undeniable. Kalin slowly stood up. It seems the error wasn't in Miss Mendez's work, but in a blatant, pathetic attempt to undermine this project. My contract and my confidence are with the architect whose original work was flawless, not with a leadership team that either fosters or is completely blind to the vipers in its own office. We are done here today." He looked once more at Aara, a look of profound, unwavering respect in his eyes. Then he turned and walked out of the room, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. Aara stood in the ruins of the meeting, no longer a victim, but the last person standing. After Kalin Vance walked out, leaving the careers of senior partners in ashes, Aara stood frozen for a moment amidst the chaos. Then, turning her back on the panicked executives, she walked out of the conference room, her only thought being the need for air, for space. She didn't get far. He was waiting for her in the empty hallway, away from the prying eyes. Kalin. He wasn't looking at his phone or checking the time. He was just waiting. For her. Are you all right? The question was simple, direct. He wasn't offering pity, just genuine concern. Aara could only nod, her throat tight with unspent emotion. Thank you for what you did in there. He shook his head slightly, dismissing her gratitude. Don't thank me. Your work spoke for itself. I just made sure everyone was forced to listen. Integrity is a rare commodity, Aara. Don't ever let anyone, not your ex-husband, not your boss, not anyone, take yours. He held her gaze for a moment longer, a look of profound, unwavering respect in his eyes. It was a promise of an alliance that went beyond the boardroom. Then, with a final, small nod, he turned and walked toward the elevators, leaving her with a sense of stability she hadn't felt in years. He hadn't saved her, but he had stood with her, and that made all the difference. The consequences of that meeting were swift and brutal. An internal investigation was launched, uncovering Karen's pattern of sabotage and plagiarism. A few days later, Aara saw Karen by her old office, packing her belongings into a cardboard box. Aara felt no need for revenge, just a quiet, final need for closure. You have an incredible gift, Karen. I just hope that wherever you go next, you finally trust it enough that you don't have to extinguish someone else's light just to feel seen. Aara turned and walked away, feeling light. The ghosts that had haunted her for so long had vanished. The next week, the firm, desperate to keep the Vance contract, gave Aara the corner office, the one that used to belong to Karen. As she stood looking out over the New York skyline, she wasn't just looking at a view, she was looking at her future, a future she would design herself. Months passed. Aara was no longer a junior architect, she was a force. One evening, Kalin asked her to meet him at the construction site. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the steel bones of the building, reaching for the sky. He smiled when he saw her, a genuine, unguarded smile. I wanted you to see it, not as a blueprint, but as a beginning. It's real. It's incredible, to feel it taking shape. He turned to face her, his expression shifting into something more serious, more vulnerable than she had ever seen. Before I met you, Aara, I only saw the concrete and steel. I built an empire, but I felt like I was living in an empty building of my own making. And then I saw you. I saw them try to erase you, and you refused to break. You fought back not with anger, but with undeniable talent, with integrity. You didn't just design a building with a soul. You reminded me that I had one. My admiration for your work has become something much more. You didn't just show me a blueprint, Aara. You showed me a future I had stopped believing was possible. Tears welled in Aara's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. It was the overwhelming release of being truly seen. She reached out, her hand gently touching his chest. For years, I felt like a ghost, Kalin. I walked through my own life leaving no footprints. I had a voice, but I had forgotten how to use it. The day of the gala, when you knew my name, when you knew my work, it was the first time in so long that I felt real. You didn't save me. You did something far more important. You saw me. And that gave me the courage I needed to finally save myself. He gently reached out and cupped her face with his hand. And in the golden light of the sunset, surrounded by the foundation of the future they had designed together, he leaned in and kissed her,
It wasn't a kiss of sudden, fiery passion. It was a kiss of recognition, a quiet, profound confirmation of two souls who had finally found their home. That kiss was not an ending. It was a groundbreaking. The story of Aara and Kalin didn't end there. It was just the beginning.
1 year later, they were married. A small, intimate ceremony. In his vows, Kalin didn't speak of her beauty, but of her resilience. He thanked her for taking the empty framework of his life and designing a future with a soul. In her vows, Aara spoke of finding a partner who didn't try to quiet her voice, but instead passed her a microphone. 3 years later, the sign on a bustling downtown office read, Mendez Vance Architecture. They had built their own firm from the ground up. One afternoon, Aara stood in their bright, airy office looking over the final plans for the new children's hospital they were designing pro bono. Kalin walked in, a warm smile on his face. I just got off the phone with the hospital board. They approved the rooftop garden atrium. The chairman called it visionary. Aara smiled, a playful glint in her eyes. And what did you say? I told them I could have told them that 3 months ago and saved us all a meeting. Then I sent them your cost-benefit analysis. Ah, you met them on your turf. Numbers and logic. Someone taught you well. He laughed and came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. His eyes were on a different sketch on the table beside them. A beautiful, sun-drenched design for their new house. Speaking of future projects, I was looking at the plans for our house. I'm thinking this room here. It needs a smaller desk and maybe a crib. Aara leaned back against him, placing her hand over his. Her smile was full of a quiet, profound joy. I think that's the best design you've ever had. 7 years later, on a bright Saturday afternoon, Aara and Kalin sat on a bench with their 5-year-old daughter, Lily. They were in a new, beautifully designed public park that was Aara's passion project. Lily pointed to the skyline, where the setting sun reflected off the magnificent Vance Tower. Its vertical gardens were lush, and as dusk began to fall, the facade started to emit a soft, gentle, living glow. It was an icon, a building with a soul. Kalin looked from the tower to Aara, his eyes full of a love that had only deepened with time. The ghosts of their pasts were long gone, replaced by a shared legacy of family and creation. Aara finally understood. The greatest act of love she had ever received was not being saved from the fall. It was being seen, truly seen by the one person who mattered, and then having the courage to see herself in the same light. And from that moment on, she was never invisible again.
Aara's journey was about being seen for her true worth, first by someone else, and finally by herself. We believe everyone has a story of overcoming. We would love to hear yours. Tell us in the comments, what was a moment in your life when you felt truly seen for who you are? Your story could be the light that someone else needs to read today. If you love emotional stories about empowerment, overcoming challenges, and a love built on mutual respect, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next chapter. The journey doesn't have to end here. Click on one of the videos appearing on your screen now to continue being moved by our stories. Thank you for your company and for being part of our community. We'll see you in the next story.